how can the company with 13 billion in revenues make 1.4 trillion of spend commitments?
Brad, if you want to sell your shares, I'll find you a buyer. Enough.
Most analysts, think that this stock is overpriced. You have people like Michael Burry out there shorting it.
When I hear short sellers attacking and trying to call the AI revolution into question, it just is super triggering.
Hi everyone, JJ here. Welcome back. Well, today we're going to look at a couple of stories that I think are pretty funny and related to the AI bubble that's developing. Yes, I do think it's that. It's not financial advice in any way, just what I'm observing and from experience. I did live through the dot-com bubble, and I do think this is kind of developing in a similar way. So the two stories that I want to talk about today is this one here. Sam Altman loses his cool when asked about OpenAI's minuscule revenue. And there's a funny video associated with that. We can see his crash out in real time, which is pretty funny. And I'll talk about that and how it does relate to some past events that were similar in a way during some difficult times for the stock market, let's say. And this one that is related also, the big short guy just bet $1 billion that the AI bubble pops. So this is Michael Burry. And if you've seen the Big Short movie, he was in that. He was famous for that. And now he's making a big bet against a couple of companies in the AI sector, one being NVIDIA and the other one Palantir. So we'll look at that story. And it has to be said, he has been wrong on a few things in the past few years. He did pick the kind of bubble that happened in 2021 or the elevated market. He doesn't quite get the timing right. Shorting the market is difficult, or shorting stocks. Warren Buffett says that. And this is a related story where the CEO of Palantir, Alex Karp, had a similar kind of crash out, talking about Michael Burry's short. He did not like it. So let's get into these stories. First, Sam Altman. OpenAI is planning to spend an exorbitant amount of money building an AI infrastructure as it continues trying to achieve artificial general intelligence through sheer computational scale. So that's building AI data centers. That's the huge amount of compute. There are literally hundreds of billions, trillions at this point going into this race that's developing to develop AGI, the artificial general intelligence, where AI will supposedly be more intelligent, not just than some humans, but all humans put together. So this is the narrative that's been happening for quite some time now. So that's why so much money's been thrown at it. Now, this is the tweet associated with it, and there's a video clip here. Apparently, if you ask Sam Altman how his $13 billion money-losing for-profit, not-for-profit can support $1.4 trillion of spend commitments, he gets very defensive and starts to attack non-existent short sellers. I cannot wait for OpenAI to be a public company. Of course, it's a private company, but it does have a valuation that people in the sector know about, and that valuation is getting way up there despite the really meager revenue and the expectations. Does this remind you of the dot-com bubble? It certainly does to me. Anyway, let's see this video, and I will talk about it afterwards. It's just short.
Is how can the company with 13 billion in revenues make 1.4 trillion of spend commitments? And you've heard the criticism,
First
Sam.
of all, we're doing well more revenue than that. Second of all, Brad, if you want to sell your shares, I'll find you a buyer. Enough. People are. I think there's a lot of people who would love to buy OpenAI shares. I don't think you would,
including myself. Including myself.
This guy's a supporter and investor. He's not against him at all. So losing it like this is pretty funny. And that's the CEO of Microsoft at the bottom, who is invested in OpenAI. Talk about that in a minute. So if something goes wrong, I think Microsoft would be involved, but I'll talk about that in a second.
Who talk with a lot of breathless concern about our compute stuff or whatever, that would be thrilled to buy shares. So I think we could sell, your shares or anybody else's to some of the people who are making the most noise on Twitter, whatever, about this very quickly. We do plan for revenue to grow steeply. Revenue is growing steeply. We are taking a forward bet that it's going to continue to grow, and that not only will ChatGPT keep growing, but we will be able to become one of the important AI clouds, that our consumer device business will be a significant and important thing, that AI that can automate science will create huge value. So, there are not many times that I want to be a public company, but one of the rare times it's appealing is when those people are writing these ridiculous OpenAI is about to go out of business and, whatever. I would love to tell them they could just short the stock, and I would love to see them get burned on that. But, we carefully plan. We understand where the technology, where the capability is going to go, and how the products we can build around that and the revenue we can generate. We might screw it up. Like, this is the bet that we're making, and we're taking a risk along with that.
Now, I just want to say, you might have noticed the logo on screen, the new logo, the John Johnston Lounge. If you're listening, there's a new logo there. I haven't changed the name yet of the show. I'm going to change it next week. I'm going to give a week's notice. Looking forward to it starting next week. I've got quite a few thoughts on this. So a lot of people do not like Sam Altman. I mean, his vocal fry is a bit annoying too. I don't know if that's an affectation or he just does that, but he is not really liked out there in the public. He's a nemesis of Elon Musk, but people really don't like either of them. A lot of people, but some people do in the tech community. They do. A lot of people love Elon Musk. And I think what Sam Altman really wants, I think what he needs, what he wants is for OpenAI to eventually go public. They'll talk about them doing that soon. I mean, their market is inflated for AI. I think it was definitely gone up and up and up. So it tends to be a time when companies do go public, where they sell shares to the public at a really inflated rate. That's what happened during the dot-com bubble, when there was next to no revenue for a lot of those companies there. OpenAI does have revenue, but it's getting way out of whack compared to the commitments that they've made. And so Sam Altman says this race to get to AGI, artificial general intelligence, that's really their aim. So if that doesn't happen, if the expectations suddenly go down for whatever reason, things could go badly. And Microsoft does have a lot of commitment, a lot of working with OpenAI. So say if OpenAI did get into real trouble, like during the dot-com bubble, valuations went way down, Microsoft was involved, I'm sure the Microsoft valuation would go down, but they're just such a massive company with massive revenue. Don't think it would particularly hurt Microsoft long term. And what might happen, I think, this is just speculation. I don't know if that did happen. Microsoft could go in and really sweep up OpenAI, or they do have the data centers are involved with Microsoft anyway, so that if they could just incorporate OpenAI, and at that point, I think it would be really between Google Gemini AI, which I do use. It's good and it's getting better and better. I pay for the pro version of that. So it would be Microsoft versus Google in a big way. And we see Sam Altman being super defensive here. And one thing that I wanted to mention was Enron. And I'm not saying that OpenAI is Enron at all. I'm just saying what happened there with one of the big crash outs. The CEO crashed out. The beginning of the downfall there was on an earnings call when the CEO called one of the analysts who were asking difficult questions about the financials, or really not that difficult, called him an a-hole. And that was kind of shocking back then. When that happened, that was kind of the beginning of the end. It was kind of shocking, and that was the first sign of real public trouble. And so the crash outs like this are, I'm not going to say a red flag, but definitely orange, yellow flags going up with stuff like this when CEOs are getting pretty defensive about it. And so he was talking about shorting the stock. So if it goes public, and it's been talked about that it could be around $1 trillion valuation. So a company going public and getting $1 trillion valuation in the public markets would be absolutely incredible, considering the revenue. And he did sort of misspeak there. He said, we're going to have steeply climbing revenue, or we already have. So, that's more defensive there. And as I said, the guy asking questions here is an investor and he's very supportive, and he was sort of taken aback by what Sam Altman said here, that he was sort of surprised that he was so defensive. And I think he has said that it's a bubble. He's admitted that it's a bubble, Sam Altman. There've been a number of people. I've seen Peter Thiel, who was an early investor in Facebook and a co-founder of Palantir, which we'll get to in a second. He thinks it's a bubble. Well, he said it feels very 1999-ish, and that was a while ago. That was months ago at the All In Summit. Other people have too. Jeff Bezos thinks it's an infrastructure bubble, an AI infrastructure bubble, but he said that that isn't necessarily bad, and you could look at it that way. The dot-com bubble was a bubble, but it worked out the way that it was intended in the end, including, I mean, the internet, everything that I'm doing here on the internet, video on the internet on demand. We had Netflix, we've got Google, we've got big Amazon, but there were a lot of years, if somebody had invested during the dot-com bubble near the end there, to get the money back on the investment would have taken years and years. I think Microsoft was valued by the market around $600 billion back then, which seemed ridiculously high. And then it went down, and it took more than a decade to get back to where it was. So stuff like that can happen. I'm not predicting anything, but as I said, I do think that it is turning into a bubble, and it's getting bigger and bigger by the week. So this other story that's related, the big short guy, that's Michael Burry, just bet $1 billion that the AI bubble pops. And as I said, most people have seen the Big Short movie, so they will remember him in there, where he did have a big short on the market, and it took a long time to pay off. Some of his investors pulled out, and then it paid off big. So they say here, Michael Burry, who famously shorted the US housing market before its collapse in 2008, has bet over $1 billion that the share prices of AI chip maker NVIDIA and software company Palantir will fall, making a similar play, in other words, on the prediction that the AI industry will collapse. According to the Securities and Exchange Commission, his fund bought $187.6 million in puts on NVIDIA and $912 million in puts on Palantir. So if it pays off, it's going to be a big payoff. And what's happening here is that the CEO of Palantir was asked about this. We're going to have a look at that video and go through that in a minute. So Burry similarly made a long-term $1 billion bet from 2005 onwards, if you don't know. So this didn't play out for a while. He had to wait against the US mortgage market that was anticipating its collapse. His fund rose a whopping 489% when the market did subsequently fall apart in 2008. And that's all played out in the movie. If you've seen that, you might remember that, where he was starting to freak out. Maybe I'm wrong, but he was right, and it just took a while to play out, but it paid off big. And so people know this, and here I want to get to this. Alex Karp, who's the CEO of Palantir, obviously he was asked about this, Michael Burry's bet, and he was freaking out about it. Frankly, he kind of lost it, more so than Sam Altman. I mean, as somebody said in a social media comment today to me, I mean, Alex Karp wears his heart on his sleeve, is the way that they put it. And he does. And he has not been kind to short sellers. He hates them. Elon Musk has also hated short sellers in the past. And it's kind of, again, an orange flag when CEOs do this. Other CEOs will just ignore short sellers completely. Jeff Bezos hasn't said much about short sellers. And so when CEOs do this, it's like, why are you so concerned about short sellers? If the company's doing well, if there's no problem, what do you care about it? And the fact is that the Palantir valuation is pretty high. Look at this. Just one metric, the P ratio is 439. And a lot of people say when the market's elevated and we've got high growth tech stocks, which Palantir is, that P ratio doesn't really matter anymore. But the fact is that's still very high, even for a high PE. And we've got NVIDIA, which is actually lower, 55. I mean, they've got a lot of revenue coming in, and it's basically from these big companies, the Mag 7 companies that are buying the chips from them. And so that's a lower P ratio. And also Meta is 28. And so they're one of the companies buying from NVIDIA. But anyway, let's see what Alex Karp had to say. It's quite entertaining, and I'll comment on it. Listen to this.
But, I was listening to the call yesterday, and I wanted to, just for those who didn't get an opportunity to hear it, I think you made some fascinating points about why you think this company and maybe even yourself are so misunderstood.
Well, there are lots of easy ways to misunderstand me. I misunderstand myself, and it's not like the super conventional playbook thing. Look, we're an anti-playbook company.
Okay, so he actually gets into politics a bit here, which I'll comment on. He says he's a progressive, which is very questionable at this point, but anyway, I'll let him talk.
If you want to do the personal version, I'm like this dyslexic, formerly, and I believe currently still left of center, who actually sticks up for progressive values, which triggers, TDS loving people, because I think the Democrats aren't no longer progressive. And then,
okay, so that's not controversial that the Democrats are no longer progressive, the mainstream. But he does talk about the New York City mayoral election, which has just been, and he does not like that. So one of the big criticisms, which I have talked about before, Palantir does work with the Israeli government and the conflict that they've been having there. And so he's had a lot of criticism for that. He's very proud to do that kind of work. And so to say that he has kind of progressive values or lefty values is pretty questionable at this point, considering some of the things that Palantir has been doing, this digital surveillance, working with the government. I mean, there are so many things that just sort of cry out that he is not what he professes to be anyway.
The company is built in a truly sui generis, unique way, which would only be possible in America, and actually explodes every assumption of how an expert would build a software business. The more you actually know about building software, the more odd, unique, and inexplicable our rise in success, and I would say domination on the enterprise software battlefield looks and is. And then I would say one of my main issues is Palantir, because we called a lot of things that are kind of establishment views that often are viewed as kind of being super woke into question in every single assumption of Palantir. The people who piled in to Palantir were people investing their own money, often people who are not in the investor class, non-experts. And even till today, the experts sit on the sideline and say, hey, this can't be true, while the average American who invested in Palantir, and for the first time, maybe arguably since World War II, average Americans got venture returns investing in Palantir.
Okay, so he has a retail investor army. A lot of people like him. A lot of people on YouTube. There's a few YouTube channels that have championed Palantir. And I'm not saying that the company isn't doing well. It clearly is, but everybody knows that, and the valuation has gone up and up. And he's about to talk about how much he hates the short sellers here, which again, bit of an orange flag, I would say, about CEOs being so concerned about that. And it relates to OpenAI as well, where I think Sam Altman does really want to go public because, these stocks, these companies that have retail investor army supporting them. We definitely have Tesla, we have Palantir, and OpenAI. I think Sam Altman would really like that. It kind of helps, and it helps the valuation. Where there's a kind of high percentage of retail investors in there. I mean, arguably, I think that Tesla's become a meme stock at this point, largely because of that retail army with supporters. The levitation of the stock kind of defies the revenue because it's all about the future, bro. But I've talked so much about that in other videos. Let's get back to Alex Karp on the short sellers. They're going to ask him about it in a second.
So you have this massive divide between the average person who evaluated themselves and the expert class that still was working on assumptions that have historically not been true, that obviously, if you look at the earnings, if you actually look at, we grew the company, I'll go through if you want to go through the numbers, but extraordinary results, and then the expert class is weak need, and the retail people are all in.
Okay, so I'm not going to go through the numbers here. This is not about that. Let's just say the company is doing well. It is. It's the question of the market valuation, and he really doesn't like the short sellers.
But in fairness,
but that's what I wanted to ask you about. In terms of because there is a misunderstanding. Clearly, you look at the analysts, most analysts, think that this stock is overpriced. You have people like Michael Burry out there shorting it. Everybody who's shorted this stock thus far has been on the losing end of it. And I'm trying to understand, just if you look at sort of the growth trajectory, the sales, how much of the sales, frankly, I think actually even there was a huge part coming from even existing customers, and just what the scale of this thing ultimately looks like in your mind.
Okay, there are two parts. Of course, when I hear short sellers attacking what I believe is clearly the most important software company in America, and therefore in the world in terms of our impact, simply to make money, and trying to call the AI revolution into question, where we have this anomalous numbers, 114, rule of 40, et cetera. It just is super triggering, because these people, they could pick on any company in the world. They have to pick on the one that actually helps people, that actually has made money for the average person, that is actually supporting our warfighters. Why do they have to go after us? And I'll tell you what, it's crazy motivating, because I'll tell you why the short sellers are constantly getting screwed by Palantir. Because every time they short us, we just are like tripling down on getting the better numbers, and part, honestly, to make them poorer.
Okay, so he really doesn't like it, and referring to Michael Burry, and he hopes that short sellers don't make money or lose money. You can lose a lot of money in a short. I don't go short on anything because you can lose a lot of money. I think it's better just to stay long on things that you really believe that the company's going to get better. And Palantir, as I said, clearly is doing well. And I think Michael Burry would say that. He's not saying that it's a fraud or anything like that. It's just that it's way overvalued, I would say. Although Michael Burry hasn't actually said, he doesn't say much about it, but it's about the actions, right? So we have another CEO being super defensive as involved in the AI sector, where valuations are looking pretty stretched, I think. There's not investment advice, and I can't tell what's going to happen. Things can always go on and on and on. In fact, the market can often go on in bubble situations way more than people think they would. There's this famous story long ago. Isaac Newton, who was, one of the best minds in the world, most intelligent people, can still be fooled by FOMO. He made money in the South Sea Company bubble. If you read about that, it's pretty extraordinary. These things tend to be, rhyme over history, but that was massive. And he made a lot of money. He made really his fortune out of that. And he sold out at a good time as the bubble went up. But people that he knew made more money, kept in, making more money, and he got sucked back into the market. And it just happened to be near the peak, and he lost his fortune. That's the way the story goes. And this kind of happens in every bubble. But it's very hard to stay out of it when your neighbors, your friends are making so much money, and then it can come crashing down very quickly. But I'm not saying that's what's going to happen, but in bubbles, that's what tends to happen. You can't time these things, but I'm saying that things are looking pretty elevated. But as I said, these things can go on for years. If you were to look at the dot-com bubble, even in 1998, and it went on till early 2000. So that's what can happen. I mean, there are other stories about this too. Look at this. Meta stock plummets as investors horrified at how much Zuckerberg is spending on misfired AI. So there's questions starting to be asked. Meta will be spending between 70 and 72 billion on AI this year. So when these questions start being asked, and as I said in the past, when CEOs start to get defensive and crash out in interviews, it's sort of a start of a warning sign. I don't know, but it's going to be very entertaining. I'm going to keep making some videos about this. It's something that I'm interested in. Market bubbles. I've read quite a few books about market bubbles over time. I've experienced the dot-com bubble. And in 2021, when this tech got very elevated, and that's when ChatGPT was invented in late 2022, and the market took off again. And here we are. Now, what do you think about this? I really want to know what you think about this. Do you think there's an AI bubble going on? How long do you think it will go on for? And we're just speculating here. We don't know. You may not think there's a bubble at all. You think that they're going to get to AGI and that will actually accelerate the world economy, and it's going to be fantastic, and we won't have this dot-com bubble-like crash at all. I don't know what's going to happen. What do you think? Let me know. And right below me here, I'm going to put a related video. Do go and see that now if you want to. And do join the channel as a member if you want to. That's an option. You get early access to videos, usually about 7 hours earlier. And also priority reply to comments on YouTube. There's comments on Spotify too. We're on Spotify and the audience is growing over there, which is really great. Also, I'm going to put a subscribe link on screen here on YouTube. Do subscribe if you're not yet. And thanks for watching this one, and I'll see you in the next one.